A constitution is defined as a fundamental law of a nation or state. It is the constitution that establishes the character and basic principle of the government. The system that runs the government is often codified in its written document, which forms the fundamental rules and principles by which an organization is managed. The purposes of a constitution is as follows. First, it prescribes the kind of government that will exist in the state. Second, it creates the different departments and specifics in their respective functions and duties. Third, it is a source of the sovereign powers of the government by establishing the fixed, first, or basic principle. And lastly, it promotes public welfare. The Constitution establishes the rights of the people which the government is obligated to protect. The Constitution is written by a constitutional convention, which is a body assembled for an express purpose of framing of writing a constitution, revising an existing one, or proposing amendments to it. There are 6 constitutions of the Philippines. The Biak na Bato Republic Constitution of 1897, the Malolos Republic Constitution of 1899, the Japanese occupation and the Second Philippine Republic Constitution of 1943, the 1973 Constitution and Marcos dictatorship, the Freedom Constitution of 1986, and lastly, the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines.
The Biak na Bato Republic Constitution in 1897. It was on November 1, 1897, it became the provisionary constitution of the government during the revolution against Spain. This was when the leadership of General Emilio Aguinaldo, there are 2 Filipinos, namely Isabelo Artaco and Felix Ferrer, were tasked to write a constitution. They both come to an idea of adopting the provisions of the constitution framed in Himaguaya, Cuba, and from this, the Constitution of Biak na Bato was formulated. The Pact of Biak na Bato, signed on December 14, 1887, created an armistice between the Spanish and the Philippine government under Emilio Aguinaldo to end the Philippine Revolution. The government was formed by a Supreme Council composed of a President, Vice President, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Foreign Relations, Secretary of War, and a Secretary of the Treasury. The power of the Council are to issue orders and other laws for the security of the state, impose, collect taxes, raise an army, ratify treaties, and to convene an assembly of the representatives. This constitution only lasts for 2 years.
After the defeat of Spain by the United States in 1898, the Filipinos began creating an independent nation. June 12, 1898, the Philippine independence was declared. With that, Aguinaldo ordered the convening of the Congress in Malolos, Bulacan, and appointed delegates on September 15, 1898. This time, the Constitution was inspired from the Constitution of Mexico, Belgium, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Brazil, and France. So the 4 main features of the Constitution. First, it was based on democratic traditions in which the government formed was popular, representative, and responsible, with 3 distinct branches, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The second one, it called for a presidential form of government formed with the president elected for a term of 4 years by majority of the assembly convened as a constituent assembly. The third, it recognized the freedom of religion and the separation of the church and state. And the fourth one, it emphasized and safeguarded the basic rights of not only Filipinos but foreigners as well through a Bill of Rights from Article 19 to 23. And Malolos Republic was the first democratic government of the country. Its governance include the management of social services, education, the creation of an army, monetary system, and diplomatic activity.
The Japanese occupation and the Second Philippine Republic in 1943. The kapisanan ng paglilingkod sa bagong Pilipinas or Kalibape was the head propagators of the Japanese policies in the Philippines. The kapisanan ng paglilingkod sa bagong Pilipinas, a Filipino political party during Japanese occupation, convened and elected a Philippine Commission for Philippine Independence. With only a preamble and 12 provisions, the Constitution was essentially a reduced version of the 1935 Constitution. It was only successful during the war, hence it was transitional in character. It established a republic with 3 offices, the executive, legislative, and judicial, but no legislature was constituted due to the conflict. The president possessed all of the government's power. On September 4, 1943, the Japanese-sponsored 1943 Constitution was signed in a General Assembly. 2 days later, it was notified by 117 members of the Kapisanan sa Paglilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas, the only political organization allowed during the Japanese occupation. Following this, on October 14, 1943, Jose P. Laurel was appointed as the president, hence the proclamation of the Second Republic. Only in Japanese-controlled areas of the Philippines was the 1943 Constitution recognized as legal and binding, but the United States administration and the Philippine Commonwealth government ignored it. With the liberation of the Philippines by the American forces in 1945 and the re-establishment of the Commonwealth in the Philippines, an exile was abolished along the Second Republic.
Constitution of the Marcos Declaration. On June 1, 1971, a constitutional convention was convened at the Manila Hotel. Its purpose was to write a new constitution that would meet the new challenges confronting the Philippine Republic that developed since it was formed in 1946. It was during the second term of President Ferdinand Marcos that the convention opened. So almost immediately, the convention became controversial. The delegates concentrated more on speeches and giving themselves allowances before actually sitting down to discuss the provisions of the new constitution. Meanwhile, the peace and order situation brought about by the first quarter storm deteriorated, with student rallies and other protests rocking the metropolis. So the biggest scandal came when lady delegate Eduardo Quintiero accused Marcos of bribing delegates to vote for a provision to extend the presidential term of office and to change the form of government. So this is Eduardo Quintiero. But the convention's activities soon came to a temporary halt when President Marcos declared martial law on September 21, 1972. He abolished Congress and reorganized the government. So several days later, the convention was reconvened and a draft constitution was finally finished and approved on November 30. Instead of being ratified by plebiscite, however, Marcos submitted it to citizen assemblies that was formed to approve and reject the new constitution. The plebiscite was held from January 10 to 15, 1972, and the constitution was overwhelmingly approved. On January 17, 1973, President Marcos signed Proclamation number 1102 declaring the 1973 Constitution ratified. So the 1973 Constitution provided for a parliamentary form of government in which the President was the symbolic head of state and the Prime Minister was the head of government. The Prime Minister, who was nominated by the President, acted as the head of the cabinet. So legislative power was vested in the Batasang Pambansa.
The Constitution also provided for the establishment of the Civil Service Commission, the Commission on Elections, and the Commission on Audit. So in 1981, amendments were made to the 1973 Constitution and the President was restored from a symbolic head of state to its original status as the head of state and chief executive of the country. So the amendment Constitution also granted the President several powers and functions which were originally vested in the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. The 1973 Constitution remained in force until the February 22 to 25 EDSA People Power Revolution of 1986, which toppled the Marcos administration. It was abolished with the adoption of the 1986 Freedom Constitution by the administration of President Corazon Aquino.
The Freedom Constitution, 1986. On March 24, 1986, President Aquino signed Proclamation No. 3 entitled Declaring a National Policy to Implement the Reforms Mandated by the People, Protecting Their Basic Rights, Adopting a Provisional Constitution, and Providing for an Orderly Transition to a Government under New Constitution. The Provisional Constitution, later called the Freedom Constitution, was proclaimed, setting aside the 1973 Constitution. It basically adopted some provisions of the 1973 Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights. Under the Freedom Constitution, the President continued to exercise legislative powers until a legislature was convened under a new constitution. Furthermore, the President was given the power to appoint the members tasked to a draft truly reflective of the ideals and aspiration of the Filipino people.
The 1987 Constitution. On April 23, 1986, President Cory Aquino issued Proclamation No. 9 constituting a constitutional commission charged with drafting a new constitution. Appointed to 50 Constitutional Commission members representing the various sectors of society from politics to the arts and religion. On June 2, 1986, the Constitutional Commission headed by former Justice Cecilia Muñoz Palma commenced its session. The Constitutional Commission completed their task on October 12, 1986 and presented the draft constitution to President Aquino on October 15, 1986. February 2, 1987, a plebiscite for its ratification was held with an overwhelming 17 million plus voted to ratify the new constitution while 5 million plus voted against it. On February 11, 1987, the new constitution was proclaimed and ratified in effect. The president, government officials, and military pledged allegiance to the new constitution. The 1987 Constitution is the current Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. The complete provisions of the 1987 Constitution are as follows.